I'm Steven with Precision Raceworks, and today we're installing our AFS 800 on this Supra. When it comes to fueling for high-powered port-injected cars, the AFS is hands down the best option out there. This kit gives your tuner ultimate control over your fuel system by keeping the PI system entirely separate from the DI system, all while keeping everything in the tank. This AFS 800 kit will allow this car to have enough fueling for over 1,200 wheel horsepower. With that said, let's get started. So we're going to start out by undoing these. Okay, disconnect the fuel line by pressing the two clips. Unlock the latch and then press it to release. Oh, that came off way easier than I planned. And capture the fuel. This is just the holder for the float. And this is float connector for the tank. We'll do with the other float connector in a little bit. I don't know how this is all. Oh shit. Still leaking. Okay, and then make sure you dump the fuel out of the bucket before you pull it out. And out. Okay.
What'd you do there?
Ah, damn it. Disconnecting the power cable from the pump. Yeah, I will. There it goes. Now, removing the float harness from the top hat. With the top hat removed, now we're to install the new fuel line, making sure that the output points up. Now you take your lower plug and play harness, connect it to the fuel pump, pressing all the way down. Float connector, connect it to the white and black. Take your AN8 ORB to AN6 male flare adapters and thread them into the filter. Using a 7/8 wrench, you can tighten it up. Do the same thing to the other side. To service the filter, simply unscrew it. These are included with a check valve. Next, we're going to mount the filter ring to the bracket. We have two brackets. This one is the regulator. This one is the filter. To do that, you're going to take your small button head screws and thread them on.
Can't be shown this thing.
Next, you're going to take your socket bolt and start the threads to here, and we're just starting it so that way the filter can go in later. The filter will go in just like so. Next, we're going to set up the regulator. To do that, first remove the metal plate, and we're going to save these screws. And we're going to attach the regulator to the bracket. We can now rivet them into place. And it doesn't matter which plate goes on which side. You can choose. Regulator goes here. You can see the bracket goes this direction. Filter, make sure your screw position is up on top. The port should be facing the back of the car. Make sure the flow direction of the filter is facing the front of the car. You're going to take your AN6 ORB to AN6 male flare adapters and thread them both on. Using an 11/16 wrench, you can tighten it up. For your auxiliary pumps, you're going to take your filter socks, which these are just strainers to protect the pumps. They are not filters for your car. Remove the protective insert. Line up the filter sock onto the pump and post.
Smack the hell out of it.
Get a little love tap. Little love tap. Isn't that right, Daniel? There we go. Smack. Make sure it doesn't extend past there yet. All right. So that's done.
What
Ready?
you got? Hold it up there.
All right, so we're gonna go ahead and reinstall the factory pump into the tank. Give me that screw. We're gonna plug up this hole since the previous pump had one. Okay. All right, so then we have to lock it in place. There we go, locked in place. And now we can latch it, and it's secured. Now we're gonna take the aux pumps with the pretty billet bracket.
Yes.
Pretty billet, not 3D printed. And make sure that nothing gets caught on it. There it goes. Once it's seated, you just tighten up the screw a little bit. You can see the pumps are in there, and that screw holds it in place.
Do it again.
Reconnect your Venturi pickup. And take your new fuel hose for the aux pumps and connect it to the output, which in hindsight I should have done first. Now we can take this float sensor, reconnect it, grab your top hat. We're gonna do secondary pump into 3, primary pump into 1. We'll use C1. So this is the connector for the aux pumps. We're going to use C2. Connect it. Connector for your primary pump. We're going to use C1. Connect it. Now we can put everything in, just making sure that nothing gets in the way of the float. If you forget the gasket like me, simply take it off, put the gasket on, and put it back into position. Lock ring, and rotate these out of the way before we get started. That's perfect for that one. Make sure your gasket stays in position underneath the top hat. There, fully seated. Reconnect your factory feed line to 1. C1, which is this one, the factory pump. Lock it.
Hey, nice.
And this is the connector for the secondary pumps. All right, now we're on the fuel lines. We're gonna start with the return line. We'll let it follow the same path. Now we're gonna take the feed line, put it in port 3, and it's gonna run along the same path. We're going to run the negative trigger harness since this is going to be connected via a Reflex. We're going to start off right here. And so these are just going to follow right along with the fuel lines. We'll do one extra one up here just because we are over the drive shaft. Zip tie them to one of the fuel lines, it doesn't matter which one. Up to this point, we've actually installed all the fuel lines. You can see the return line, the feed line, the factory line is plugged in here on number 1. I've also run the negative trigger harnesses so that way they can connect to the Reflex. Run those right along with the fuel lines, making sure that everything stays tucked up nice and far away from the drive shaft. You can see I've used our clamps, our billet clamps, to keep the lines together. I've also attached some of them to the factory connections. Then coming further along, we can continue following both lines up, all the way up to the filter and the regulator. I've already mounted the bracket onto the car. You utilize the 2 provided bolts and nuts to attach right here. And the 45-degree AN goes to the input side of the filter. The 90-degree AN goes to the regulator dump. Next, we're going to run the feed and return from the filter and the regulator up to the fuel rail, along with running our harness for the Reflex. Nope, further back, where my index fingers are. This is the feed line to the port injection. We're going to fish this down. All right, we're going to tuck this up under here, if any. Hey, no fuel, I like it. So now, undo all this mess. That is an ethanol sensor.
It's got fuel.
I don't know why.
We are removing the fuel rail to gain access to the factory high pressure pump connection, so that way I can replace the line to make it better. Being that this customer had already done a lot of modifications to his car, he had already had an ethanol sensor and he had all sorts of crazy plumbing going on. So what we did is we went ahead and took all of that out, made a new line with our fittings here, with our nice quick connect fittings, so it can actually be reached behind this massive intake manifold. And we're gonna go ahead and utilize our ethanol 360 fittings to go ahead and put an ethanol sensor back into position. So it's really easy to do. All you have to do is just slide it on first till it kind of stops. Slide the locking sleeve back, push it back on further, and release the sleeve, and that is locked in position. And then I have to find the ethanol sensor. So as you can see, this is the previous line that was being utilized in this car. They use these C-clip style connections, so it's gonna take me just a minute to get these apart. Now that that's off, we just do the same thing there, and I am gonna have to get a little bit creative here due to some of the other components in place. Now That is a much cleaner setup. Plug that right back in. Just make sure your ethanol sensor stays on your DI line. Do not put the ethanol sensor on the PI line. All right. The reason why you want the ethanol sensor on the DI line and not on the PI line in a separated system is because on a PI system, like our AFS, if the AFS system gets turned off for any reason, then the car no longer knows what the ethanol content is, because ethanol sensors don't really read the ethanol content. They read what isn't gasoline. So if it's empty, it's going to read 100% E85, or it should. And now we can take these two, run them up and over and into where his Reflex is installed. We'll end up leaving the excess up here, and we'll come back and address that in a moment. Take the pressure sensor, drop it like it's hot. If you're going to use one-to-one boost reference, install a boost tap into your manifold. The Reflex is already calibrated for the sensor. So I can just, since I don't have a manual pressure gauge available to me today, I can just connect to the Reflex and read the pressure and adjust accordingly. And then we have our vacuum line at about there. So we'll cut it a little bit longer. One-to-one boost reference port, and then zip tie to keep it in place. As you can see here, we have our top hat with fuel pump already installed, our OEM feed line, our return line, our feed line for the port injection, our electrical connector for the secondary fuel pumps, our electrical connector for the primary fuel pumps, and our negative trigger harnesses, all routing across here, all the way down, utilizing clamps where necessary, up to your filter and regulator. We have our Motive 10-bar pressure sensor installed here, and then our lines running up and our vacuum line connected to the one-to-one boost reference port. First and foremost, we're going to remove the old pump activation harness. Just set that back in there so it doesn't get lost. The old activation harness disconnected, we can remove it and start installing the new ones. Since this is an AFS 800, we have two pump activation harnesses. Getting one pulled through, and before we're done, we'll pull the excess slack up here. So I generally recommend to go ahead and pull the fuse on each of these until you're ready to connect it, just to prevent any sparks, any shorts. You can connect the ring terminals to the battery. And you can either go to the battery ground, or if you have another solid ground, that's acceptable too. and we'll come back for the fuses. Now to pull out this single wire. And route your harnesses. Your harnesses coming from the battery are going to route up and over here to this tidy little corner. Zip tie them into position so they don't fall back. And then we're going to use a 13 mil to loosen the strap for the tank. And these lines, with that, you can make your connections. And that will tuck up underneath the body panels. For the wires, I've already put the fuses back into the fuse holders to be able to test everything. Now you just have to pull any excess slack back into the trunk and tuck your wires down in. Then put the battery cover back on and put it all back together. With everything installed, we've already put fuel back into the tank. All we have to do is check for leaks now before we start setting pressure. So to do that, you're going to use our 2 test plugs that we provide with each harness. You're going to disconnect, and then connect your test plugs. You should hear the pumps turn on. Now that you can hear the pumps running, we can go up to the front, check for any leaks at any of these flare fittings. Make sure you got everything tight enough. And it appears that everything is good here. Now we just have to check the top side, make sure there's no leaks up there, and then we can set the pressure. With everything installed and nothing leaking, we set the base pressure to 45 PSI using the Motive Reflex to read the pressure via Tuner Pro. All that's left for us to do now is put the car back together and start working with the tuner. If you found this video helpful, like and subscribe for more.